The letter arrived on a morning already heavy with disappointment. The small house smelled of boiled cabbage and damp wood, the kind of smell that never quite left no matter how often the windows were opened. She was at the table, mending a tear in her only good dress, when her mother placed the envelope beside her without a word. It was cream-colored, thicker than ordinary mail, with careful writing that did not belong to anyone in their town. Even before she opened it, something in her chest tightened. Her father cleared his throat and stood by the stove, not looking at her. "It's settled," he said, as if the matter had been discussed openly and agreed upon by all. "This is the best arrangement we'll ever get." She unfolded the letter with slow fingers. The words were polite, almost generous. A rancher in the Western Territories sought a wife. He owned land, cattle, and a proper home. In return, a modest sum would be sent to her family upon her arrival. The letter praised her age, her health, her ability to work. Nowhere did it mention her name. Her mother finally spoke, voice tight with practiced justification. "We can't keep feeding another mouth. Your brothers need schooling. This man will give you a roof and security." Many girls would be grateful. Grateful. The word burned. She had known hunger. She had known cold winters where blankets were shared and meals were skipped. She had worked since childhood, rising before dawn and sleeping long after dark. Yet the idea that her life could be sealed with ink and postage, without a single question asked of her, made her hands tremble. She wanted to say no. The word rose in her throat, sharp and desperate. But she had said no before, to long hours, to broken promises, to sacrifices demanded only of her, and no had never mattered. In their world, a daughter was a solution to problems, not a person with choices. That night, she lay awake listening to the house settle and creak. The letter rested on the table like a verdict. She imagined the rancher as men were often described in hushed warnings: rough, demanding, expecting obedience in exchange for survival. She had seen enough marriages to know what awaited women who were owned rather than loved. Her future felt like a narrow road with no turn back. The days that followed passed too quickly. A small suitcase was packed for her, 2 dresses, worn shoes, a shawl her grandmother had once sewn. Her mother cried while folding the fabric, though whether from sorrow or relief, she could not tell. Her father avoided her eyes entirely. At the train station, steam hissed and metal screamed as if the engine itself protested what was happening. The platform was crowded, yet she felt unbearably alone. Her family stood stiffly beside her, offering instructions instead of comfort. "Be obedient, work hard, don't shame us." When the conductor called for boarding, her mother pressed a quick kiss to her cheek. "This is for the best," she whispered, as if repeating it might make it true. She stepped onto the train with shaking legs. As it lurched forward, the town began to shrink. Along with the life she had known, hard, small, and unkind, yet familiar. She did not know what waited for her at the end of the tracks, only that it had been chosen without her consent. She stared out the window as fields blurred into distance, clutching her suitcase like an anchor. Somewhere ahead was a man she had never met, a land she had never seen, and a marriage she had not agreed to. In that moment, she made herself one quiet promise. Whatever awaited her, she would survive it. Even if her voice had been taken, her will would not be so easily claimed. The train hissed to a stop beneath a wide, pale sky that felt too open after the narrow world she had known. She stepped down onto the platform with her suitcase clutched in both hands, the wooden boards creaking beneath her worn shoes. Dust hung in the air, carried by a warm wind that smelled of earth and horses. This was the place named in the letter, the end of her journey and the beginning of whatever life had been chosen for her. Men stood scattered along the platform, some waiting for freight, others for family. She kept her eyes low, her heart beating hard. She had been told what to expect. A man who would look her over, judge her worth in a single glance, and claim her with little ceremony. She braced herself for it. Then she heard a calm voice say her name. She looked up and saw him standing a few steps away, hat in his hand. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered from years of work, his face lined by sun and wind rather than cruelty. His eyes, steady and gray, held no hunger or triumph, only quiet attention. He did not reach for her suitcase. He did not touch her at all. "You must be tired," he said. That was a long ride. The words startled her more than silence would have. She nodded, unsure how to answer. No man had ever begun an introduction by asking about her comfort. "I'm the rancher who wrote to your family," he continued. "You can call me by my name." He said it plainly, without the expectation of authority. "If you'd like, we can sit a moment before we leave." She waited for the other words, the ones that would define her role, her duty, her place, but they did not come. Around them, others reunited loudly, but he stood with respectful distance, as if giving her space were the most natural thing in the world. They walked toward his wagon, not side by side but not apart either. He lifted her suitcase only after asking permission, and even then he carried it carefully as though it contained something fragile. The small gesture unsettled her more than roughness would have. Kindness, when unexpected, felt dangerous. As the wagon rolled away from the station, she watched the town fade into the horizon. The rancher guided the reins with practiced ease, the horses responding calmly to his touch. The road stretched long and quiet before them. "I want to be clear," he said after a time, his voice even. "I didn't send for you to be owned or ordered. I needed a partner for this life, not a servant. If at any point you decide this isn't what you want, we'll find you a safe place to go." Her breath caught. She turned toward him, searching his face for deception, for the hidden cost of such words. But his gaze stayed on the road, steady and unassuming, as if he expected no immediate answer and no gratitude. She had prepared herself for survival, not choice. His words left her unsure how to stand, how to think. Years of being told what she owed the world did not vanish in a single conversation. "You don't owe me anything today," he added quietly, as if sensing her confusion. "We'll take things one step at a time." The ranch appeared in the distance, low buildings, open land, fences stretching toward the hills. It was not grand, but it was solid, honest, built by hands that valued endurance over display. As the wagon slowed, she realized her hands were no longer shaking. The fear had not disappeared, but something else had joined it, a cautious, unfamiliar hope. For the first time since the letter arrived, she felt the future loosen its grip just enough to breathe. She did not know who this man truly was, or whether his promises would hold. But as he helped her down from the wagon and pointed out the house that would be hers to rest in, she understood one thing clearly. This was not the arrival she had feared. And in that realization, the story she had been forced into began, quietly, to change. The house stood a short walk from the corral, its wooden walls sun-worn but sturdy, the kind of place built to last rather than impress. As she stepped inside, the scent of soap and clean linen caught her off guard. She had expected bare floors and harsh order, but instead found a simple warmth at the table near the window, a kettle resting on the stove, a small vase with dried wildflowers set there with quiet care. "This room is yours," the rancher said, opening a door near the back of the house. He did not step inside, only gestured. "You can keep it as you like. There's a latch on the door. No one comes in without your say." Her chest tightened at the word latch. Privacy had never been something she was allowed to claim. She nodded, unsure how to express the mix of gratitude and disbelief rising in her. They sat at the table with mugs of warm tea between them. He waited until she was settled before speaking again, as if making sure she had chosen to stay in the chair rather than feeling placed there. "There are a few things we should be clear about," he began. "Not rules meant to trap you, just understanding, so neither of us is guessing." She braced herself, spine straightening. This was the moment she had expected since the letter arrived. This was where the invisible chains would be named. "You are not required to marry me," he said calmly. "The arrangement your family agreed to doesn't bind you here. If you decide to leave, I'll see that you do so safely and with enough money to start again." The words struck like a sudden wind, knocking breath from her lungs. She searched his face for signs of cruelty hidden beneath reason, but found only seriousness, as if he understood the weight of what he was offering. "If you choose to stay," he continued, "it will be because you want this life, not because you're afraid of losing shelter or food." Her hands curled around the mug, the warmth grounding her. No one had ever separated survival from obedience before. In her world, they had always been the same thing. He went on, outlining life on the ranch, not commands, but possibilities. There was work if she wished it, paid and respected. There were days she could rest, learn, or simply be. He would not touch her unless invited. He would not expect gratitude for basic decency. "I'm not here to own you," he said finally, meeting her eyes. "I won't pretend I don't hope something might grow between us. But hope isn't a contract." Silence filled the room. Outside, a horse snorted softly, the sound ordinary and grounding. Inside, her thoughts spun. She had prepared herself to endure. She had not prepared herself to decide. "What if I make mistakes?" she asked before she could stop herself. The question slipped out, raw and unguarded. "Then you'll make them," he replied simply. Like everyone else. Something in her chest shifted at being included in everyone else, not singled out as a burden or a bargain. He stood, signaling the conversation's end without forcing it. "You should rest. The journey takes more than the body realizes." As he left her alone in the room, she touched the door latch, testing its firmness. It held. The bed was neatly made, the quilt soft beneath her fingers. For the first time in years, no one was waiting to tell her where to sleep or when to wake. She sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet settle around her. Fear still lived there, but it was no longer the only thing. There was space now, dangerous, unfamiliar space, where a future shaped by her own will might exist. Outside these walls were wide fields and long days she did not yet understand. Inside them, for the first time, were boundaries drawn in her favor. The rules of the ranch were not chains. They were choices. And as night began to fall, she realized the greatest risk she faced was no longer being controlled, but learning how to live free. Morning came softly, without the sharp commands she was used to. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains and warmed her face, and for several long moments she lay still, listening. No footsteps hurried toward her door. No voice called her name with expectation. The quiet itself felt strange, almost suspicious, as if it were a trick that would vanish the moment she moved. She sat up slowly, half expecting someone to knock and tell her she was late, but the latch remained untouched. The room was still hers. When she finally stepped into the kitchen, the rancher was already awake, repairing a leather strap at the table. He glanced up, offered a small nod, and returned to his work. "There's coffee on the stove," he said. "Help yourself if you want. If you want." The words followed her as she poured a cup, her hand steady despite the unfamiliar freedom. She waited for him to tell her what came next, but he didn't. He finished his work, stood, and stretched. "I'm heading out to check the fence line," he said. "You're welcome to come along, or you can stay here. Your choice." Her choice again. She hesitated, then shook her head. "I think I'll stay," she said carefully, as though testing the shape of the words. "All right," he replied, without disappointment or approval. He grabbed his hat and left, the door closing gently behind him. She stood alone in the house, heart pounding. In every place she had lived before, stillness meant danger. It meant waiting for instructions or blame. But here, the hours stretched open and undecided. She explored the house slowly. There were no locked cupboards, no lists of rules pinned to the wall. The shelves held practical things, extra blankets, jars of dried beans, soap wrapped in paper. In a corner by the window sat a small stack of books, their spines worn from use. She ran her fingers over them, surprised. No one had ever kept books simply to learn. Outside, the land rolled wide and quiet. She stepped onto the porch, the boards warm beneath her feet. Chickens scratched in the dirt nearby, unconcerned with her presence. The ranch breathed, unhurried. By midday, she felt a restless pull to be useful. Years of survival had taught her that worth came from labor. She swept the floor, washed the cups, straightened what was already orderly. Even then, a tightness stayed in her chest, waiting for correction. When the rancher returned, dust on his boots and sun on his shoulders, he paused at the doorway. "You didn't need to do that," he said, noticing the clean kitchen. "I wanted to," she replied quickly, afraid he might think she expected something in return. He nodded once, accepting the answer without turning it into obligation. "Thank you." The simplicity of it left her off balance. In the days that followed, the pattern continued. He offered work but never demanded it. When she helped with meals or tended the garden, he paid her fairly and thanked her like any hired hand. When she chose to rest, he did not watch her with suspicion or disapproval. At night, she lay awake, unlearning habits carved into her bones. She no longer flinched at footsteps. She no longer counted favors owed. Slowly, painfully, she began to understand that safety did not have to be earned through silence. One evening, she asked the question that had been circling her thoughts. "Why are you like this?" He considered it before answering. "Because no one thrives in chains," he said. "And because I've seen what happens when people confuse power with love." His words settled deep. She realized then that this house, modest as it was, held something she had never known: freedom without abandonment. This was a home where doors were closed for privacy, not control. Where kindness was not a debt waiting to be collected. Where she was not watched, measured, or owned. And as she stood at the window that night, watching the stars stretch endlessly across the sky, she understood something quietly extraordinary. For the first time in her life, she was not surviving someone else's rules. She was learning how to live without them. The longer she stayed, the more the past began to surface, not as distant memory, but as something restless and alive, rising in the quiet moments she now had time to feel. Freedom, she discovered, left space for old wounds to speak. It came in small, unexpected ways. The first time the rancher left money on the table after she helped mend a fence, her throat tightened. Payment had never been a sign of respect before, only a reminder that she could be replaced. She stared at the coins long after he had walked away, half expecting him to return and reclaim them with a reminder of what she owed. He didn't. At night, memories pressed in. She remembered winters where she was the last to eat. The cold bite of hunger explained away as necessity. She remembered being told she was strong, a word used to excuse every burden placed on her shoulders. Strength, she had learned, meant endurance without complaint. She began to realize how deeply that lesson had shaped her. Even here, in a house without chains, she caught herself moving quietly, making herself small, apologizing for taking up space. When she laughed rare and startled, it felt almost disobedient. One afternoon, a letter arrived bearing her family's handwriting. The sight of it made her hands shake. She carried it to her room and sat on the bed before opening it, bracing herself as though for a blow. The words were familiar, practical. Her family spoke of expenses, of neighbors asking questions, of how fortunate she was. There was no inquiry about her happiness, only a reminder that she had a duty to be grateful. They hinted carefully that more money might be needed soon. She folded the letter with careful precision and set it aside. For hours afterward, she felt 12 years old again, waiting to be told what was required of her next. That evening, she found the rancher in the barn, brushing down a horse. She stood in the doorway, uncertain, until he noticed her. He didn't ask questions right away. He simply waited. "I got a letter," she said finally. He nodded. "Do you want to talk about it?" The choice stunned her. She did want to talk. She just didn't know how. She told him pieces, not all at once. The years of being useful but unseen, the way love in her family had always come with conditions. She admitted the fear that lived in her, that if she stopped giving, she would be sent away. He listened without interrupting, without trying to fix what had already been broken. When she finished, the barn felt quieter, as though the truth itself had settled. "You don't owe them your future," he said gently. "And you don't owe me your past." The words loosened something in her chest that had been tightly bound for years. That night, she wrote a letter of her own, not a rejection, not yet, but a boundary. She explained that she was safe, that she was working, that she could not send money beyond what she chose. Her hand shook as she signed her name, claiming it fully for the first time. Sealing the envelope felt like stepping across a line she had been taught never to cross. The past did not disappear. It lingered in habits and fears, in the instinct to please. But it no longer ruled her in silence. As she placed the letter by the door to be mailed, she understood something vital. Her past had shaped her, but it did not own her. Here, on this land, with choices finally within reach, she was learning that survival did not have to define the rest of her life. And that realization, heavy as it was, carried the first true weight of freedom. Spring did not arrive gently. It came with restless skies and hard winds that tested both land and people. The ranch, so calm in the weeks before, revealed its other nature, one shaped by uncertainty, where survival depended on judgment as much as strength. The first trouble came with the cattle. A sudden illness swept through a small portion of the herd, leaving 2 calves weak and shivering despite the warming days. She watched the rancher work through the night, hand steady, voice low and reassuring as he tended them. He did not curse the loss when one failed to rise by morning. He bowed his head, took responsibility, and continued on. There was no cruelty in him, even when the frontier demanded hard choices. She offered to help, unsure if she was overstepping. He showed her what to do without impatience, trusting her with tasks that mattered. When her hands trembled, he did not take over, he guided. The quiet confidence he placed in her felt heavier than praise. Then came the neighbors. 2 men rode in one afternoon without invitation, their manners sharp, their smiles thin. They spoke of fences, of water rights, of how a woman alone could be easily misled. She stood near the doorway, her body stiff with old instincts, waiting to be spoken about rather than to. But the rancher stepped slightly in front of her, not to hide her, but to stand beside her. "She speaks for herself," he said calmly when one man laughed and asked where his bride had come from. The moment burned itself into her memory. No one had ever defended her voice before. The men left with poorly hidden irritation, and afterward she expected anger or regret or a lecture on how dangerous it was to provoke them. Instead, the rancher asked, "Are you all right?" She was, more than all right. As weeks passed, challenges stacked one upon another. A fence line collapsed in a storm. Supplies ran low. A late frost threatened the garden she had begun tending with careful hope. Each time, she watched how he responded not with force or fear, but with persistence. Problems were faced directly, without blame. Slowly, she began to change too. She learned the rhythms of the land, the signs of weather in the sky, the patience required to build something meant to last. She spoke more freely, offered opinions, even disagreed. Each time he listened. One night, after a long day of repairs, they sat on the porch as the sky deepened into purple and gold. The silence between them was comfortable now, shaped by trust rather than uncertainty. "You don't have to stay through hardship," he said suddenly, not looking at her. "I won't think less of you if you choose another path." She considered the words carefully. The thought of leaving no longer came from fear but from curiosity. That alone told her how much had changed. "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm still here." The frontier tested them both, not as master and dependent, but as two people learning how to stand together without ownership. In the face of sickness, threat, and loss, she saw who he truly was. And in surviving those trials, she began to see who she could become. Choice was a quiet thing. It did not arrive with celebration or certainty. It appeared in ordinary moments, small, almost invisible, asking to be noticed. She became aware of it one morning while standing in the yard, the sun just lifting over the hills. There was work to be done. Laundry soaking in a tub, bread dough waiting to be shaped, a section of fence still weakened from the storm. No voice told her where to begin. No consequence hovered if she chose wrong. The realization unsettled her. All her life, decisions had been made around her, for her. Choice had belonged to others' parents, circumstance, survival itself. Here, it rested in her hands, unfamiliar and heavy. She chose the fence. As she worked, she noticed how different her body felt when labor was voluntary. The ache in her arms was honest, not punishing. When she paused to rest, guilt no longer followed her like a shadow. The land did not demand more than she could give. Later that day, the rancher asked if she wanted to ride into town with him the next morning. "Or you can stay back," he added easily. "I'll come," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Town had once been a place of fear eyes that judged, whispers that weighed her worth. But walking beside him through the dusty street, she felt anchored, not hidden. He introduced her by name, not title. When shopkeepers addressed him instead of her, he redirected the conversation without comment, as if it were the most natural correction in the world. At the general store, she lingered by a bolt of fabric, fingers brushing the soft weave. She had never chosen cloth for herself before, only taken what was cheapest, most practical. "You can get it if you want," he said, noticing she hesitated. Then she shook her head. Not today. The choice mattered more than the object. That night, she wrote in a small notebook she had found among the book's thoughts, questions, fragments of dreams she had never allowed herself to imagine. A garden expanded. A room painted lighter. A life shaped slowly, deliberately. But choice also brought fear. One evening, she confessed it to him. "What if I choose wrong?" He considered her carefully. "Then you'll learn," he said. "And you'll choose again. No punishment. No final judgment. Just continuation." Days passed, marked by decisions both simple and profound. She chose to stay during a violent storm instead of fleeing the memory it stirred. She chose to speak when something troubled her. She chose silence when she needed space. And she chose him not as a necessity, not as safety alone, but as a presence she welcomed. She noticed how her laughter came easier, how her shoulders no longer curved inward. She stood taller without trying. The mirror no longer showed a girl waiting to be claimed, but a woman becoming herself. Choice did not erase fear, but it reshaped it. Fear became something to walk alongside, not something that drove her. One afternoon, standing at the edge of the field, she realized something quietly astonishing. If she left tomorrow, she would still be whole. And because of that, she could stay freely. That understanding settled into her like a promise. Her life was no longer a path laid out by others. It was a series of steps she chose, one honest decision at a time. Love, she learned, did not announce itself. It arrived the way trust had, slow, unassuming, built from what was never taken. There was no sudden confession, no moment she could point to and say this is when it began. Instead, it grew in the spaces between days. In the way he remembered how she took her tea. In the way he waited for her pace when they walked the fields together. In the way silence between them no longer needed explanation. She noticed it first in herself. One evening, she returned from the garden with dirt on her hands and exhaustion in her bones. He was at the table, reading by lamplight. When he looked up and smiled, not out of obligation, not with expectation, something warm settled in her chest. It startled her how natural it felt. Still, he did not claim her. He never assumed her presence meant permission. When their hands brushed while passing a plate, he pulled back slightly, waiting. The choice remained hers, always. And because it did, her fear never needed to rise to protect her. One night, after a long day, they sat on the porch as the moon climbed high. The air was cool, the world quiet. She spoke without planning to. "I've never known what it's like," she said, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. "To be wanted without being owned." He turned toward her, careful even then. "You still don't owe me anything," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's why this feels different." The words hung between them, fragile and true. From that moment, something shifted, not in his behavior, but in her courage. She began to let herself lean closer, to meet his gaze instead of looking away. When she reached for his hand, she did it slowly, giving herself time to listen to her own heart. He did not tighten his grip. He did not pull her closer than she chose. His hand was steady, warm, present, and nothing more. Love, she realized, could exist without possession. It could be something offered, not demanded. They spoke honestly then, about hopes and hesitations. He admitted he feared crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. She admitted she feared losing herself if she let love take root. "We'll go as slow as we need," he said, "even if that's slower than the world expects." In the days that followed, affection deepened without pressure. A shared smile across the table. A quiet laugh at the end of a hard day. A gentle touch, always asked for, never assumed. She felt herself opening, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. For the first time, love did not feel like surrender. It felt like expansion. Standing beside him in the fading light, she understood the difference between being chosen and being claimed. One erased a person. The other allowed her to remain whole. And in that wholeness, love finally found a place to stay. The letter arrived on a dry afternoon, carried by the same routine hand that brought seed catalogs and spare parts. She recognized the handwriting instantly. This time, her hands did not shake. She read it at the table while the house stood quiet around her. The tone had changed, less polite, more urgent. Her family spoke of mounting debts, of neighbors questioning arrangements, of sacrifices they had made. Between the lines lay the same message as always: "You owe us." She folded the paper slowly. The old fear stirred, but it did not take control. She no longer felt like a child being summoned. She felt like a woman being challenged. When the rancher returned, she told him about the letter without apology or hesitation. He listened, his expression steady, the way it always was when something mattered. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Not what should we do. Not what do they expect. What do you want? The answer came easier than she expected. "I want to face them," she said, "not to beg, not to argue. Just to be clear." They traveled together to the nearby town where her family had arranged to meet. She felt the weight of old roles pressing against her as she stepped into the familiar space, but she did not step back into them. Her parents looked older, smaller. They spoke quickly, anxiously, as though urgency might reclaim authority. They spoke of duty, of reputation, of what she had been given. She listened. Then she spoke. She told them she was safe, that she was working, that she would not send money unless she chose to, and that she would not return. Her voice did not rise. It did not break. She did not justify herself. Her mother cried. Her father accused. The words hit old scars, but they did not reopen them. "I'm grateful for what you did when you could," she said. "But my life is mine now." Silence followed, heavy and unfamiliar. When they left, she expected grief. Instead, she felt something closer to release. Outside, the rancher waited where he always did, near, but not intervening. He did not praise her strength. He did not turn the moment into victory. "You did well," he said simply. On the ride home, she watched the land stretch open before them, wide and unclaimed. The past no longer followed her like a shadow. It stayed where it belonged behind her. That night, she slept deeply. She had faced the people who once defined her, and they no longer held the power to name her future. And in that freedom, she was finally ready for what came next. The morning she understood what she wanted, it did not arrive with urgency. There was no racing heart, no sudden revelation. It came quietly, like so many things had since she arrived, soft, certain, and entirely her own. She was in the field at dawn, the grass damp against her boots, the horizon blushing with the promise of another clear day. The ranch felt different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. The land no longer felt like refuge alone. It felt like belonging chosen, not assigned. When she returned to the house, the rancher was already awake, seated at the table with his coffee. He looked up as she entered, that familiar calm in his eyes, and smiled. "I've been thinking," she said, sitting across from him. Her voice was steady. He waited. "I came here because I had no choice," she continued. "I stayed because I learned how to choose, and somewhere along the way—" She paused, allowing the truth its full weight. "I fell in love with you." He did not speak immediately. He did not reach for her or rush the moment. His respect even now held firm. "I love you too," he said at last, "but only if this is freely given, not because you feel safe here, not because you feel you should." She met his gaze without flinching. "It is. I know the difference now." She reached into her pocket and placed a simple ring on the table, not a demand, not a symbol of ownership, but an offering. "I'm not asking to be kept," she said. "I'm asking to be your partner, equal, willing." Emotion crossed his face, then something deep and unguarded. He covered her hand with his, warm and sure. "Yes," he said. Always yes on those terms. They married without spectacle. No grand ceremony, no audience demanding proof of happiness. Just vows spoken under open sky, witnessed by the land that had given them both room to grow. The words were simple, but every one of them chosen. In the days that followed, nothing essential changed and everything did. She kept her room, her work, her voice. He kept his patience, his boundaries, his quiet strength. Love did not shrink her world. It expanded it. Together, they built more than a marriage. They built trust that held during hard seasons. They built a home where doors closed gently and opened freely. They built a life where no one was owned and no one disappeared to keep the peace. Sometimes she thought of the letter that had once decided her fate. How small it seemed now. How wrong. She had not been sent here to be claimed. She had come to claim herself. And in doing so, she had found a love that never asked her to be less, only to be fully, unmistakably her.